Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 10th of March of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And this video will start with the Ukrainian conflict, because during the previous 24 hours, more precisely just 30 minutes before I started making this video, the Ukrainians launched a massive missile attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation, and the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Bryansk, and lots of explosions were recorded. The Ukrainians were attacking this military plant that the Russians were using to produce chips for air defense forces. So these are the videos that were published from this area. Here we can see the first seconds right after explosion. So here we can see first explosion, then we might see a few more explosions. The Ukrainians, according to information we have, were using cruise missiles, but at these moments when the first videos were published, it was difficult to understand what kind of missiles the Ukrainians were using. Some sources reported that the Ukrainians were using Neptune missiles. Some sources reported that the Ukrainians were using missiles of their own production, but later we received these videos where we can see what exactly the Ukrainians were using. So this is the plant that was attacked by the armed forces of Ukraine from another angle. And right here you might see the missile that was flying. So just take a look at this moment. You will see the missile, and according to information we have, this was the Storm Shadow missile of the United Kingdom production. So somehow, or maybe not somehow, the Ukrainians received another batch of these missiles, and they used these missiles to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. And as you can see, the Ukrainians destroyed a very important plant that the Russians were using for their air defense purposes. Since the beginning of this year, the Ukrainians have already attacked this plant, and the plant was closed for repairings and so on, but now the Russians relaunched this plant once again, and the Ukrainians attacked this territory immediately. The sources report about casualties among civilians, and this attack is not the first attack that the Ukrainians have carried out since the beginning of this week. I would like to remind you that just a few days ago the Ukrainians attacked in the direction of the city of Donetsk, and as a result of that attack, a very important military object was also destroyed. So this is the moment. This is the video that was published by Ukrainian sources. Here we can see missiles that were attacking the territory of a former Donetsk airfield. The sources reported later that the Ukrainians attacked a plant that the Russians were using to produce drones. So the drones that can carry, that can bring food, that can bring, let's say, ammo on the ground. So ground drones, the manufacturing site of the ground drones was attacked by Ukrainians somewhere on the 8th or on the 7th of March of 2026, and most likely to attack this territory, the Ukrainians were also using cruise missiles, and maybe the Ukrainians were using also the Storm Shadow missiles. And during the same day, the Ukrainians attacked a bit further to the southeast, and as you can see, another territory of the city of Donetsk was also attacked. So this is the situation, but the most important thing of this attack is not the attacks themselves. The most important thing is that during the previous 24 hours, we received not just 24 hours, since the beginning of March, more precisely, we received lots of videos of how Ukrainians using the Flamingo drones were attacking air defense forces, air defense equipment and vehicles of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So these attacks in the direction of the former Donetsk airport and in the direction of the Bryansk plant wasn't attacks that occurred from nothing. The Ukrainians started preparations before these attacks long time ago, and first of all they were trying to destroy or to damage the radars and the air defense infrastructure of the Russian Federation. And when the infrastructure was damaged, as we can see, the Ukrainians launched their massive attack with the purpose to destroy military plants of the Russian Federation. Once again, this is the video, and here we can see the moments when the third or the fourth Storm Shadow missile attacked the target. The sources reported that the Ukrainians launched up to 10 missiles in the direction of the city of Bryansk or in some other directions. The Russians managed to bring down some of them, but we see that probably 4 missiles or something like this, or even more, managed to hit the target. Obviously, these attacks were made by the Ukrainians just one purpose, to change the focus, to shift the focus back to Ukraine from the Middle East, first of all, and to shift the focus back to Ukraine from the negotiation process and the talks that took place during the previous 24 hours between the President of the United States of America and the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that there was a very constructive conversation, constructive and business-like conversation between Trump and the President of Russia, Putin. And if you remember, right after this conversation, the President of the United States of America promised or told us that the United States of America could ease or lift some sanctions from Russia. We're also waiving certain oil-related sanctions to reduce prices. We have sanctions on some countries, but we're taking those sanctions off until this strengthens out. Then who knows, maybe we won't have to put them back on. So we understand that currently the Russians have a huge and probably the biggest window of opportunities since the beginning of the special military operation. For example, here we can see the picture of the Russian stock markets. As you can see, everything is rising right now in the Russian Federation. Let's say at this in the same or based on the reports that we receive from the Middle East, based on the reports and the statements that were made based both by the Russian president and the president of the United States of America. So the Russians understand that for now it is much more important for them to save their business reputation, to show themselves as a reliable state, as a reliable from oil perspective state, energy supplier, reliable energy supplier state, and so on. And this, it is very important right now. And during this period of time, when there are talks and negotiations between different companies on the matter to reduce the sanction pressure on the Russian Federation, to save its business reputation and to save the current state of the war in Ukraine. Now, it's very important for Russians right now to keep everything as is and not to change anything, at least for the next week, 2 or 3 weeks, until the sanctions are lifted from the Russian Federation. And obviously, this attack that was carried out by the Ukrainians today and during the previous several days in the direction of the city of Donetsk may force the Russians to strike back, and we understand that the Russians may strike back, and most likely the Russians may deal significant damage to, let's say, energy infrastructure of Ukraine or something like this. And Zelensky is preparing for this. According to information we have, Germany will transfer around 35 Patriot missiles to Ukraine in the coming weeks, according to Der Spiegel. Furthermore, we received the report that Zelensky made an agreement with the Middle East state. He's going to send his, let's say, drone operators and technologies how to fight the Iranian drones in exchange for Patriot missiles and so on. So we see that Ukraine and Zelensky is trying to make Ukraine completely, fully loaded with these missiles with the purpose to repel any upcoming attack from the Russian side. So the situation is very complicated, and now the president of Russia will have to make a decision either to escalate the conflict with Ukraine, but this situation can lead to, let's say, the situation when the sanctions are not being lifted, or to wait a bit more, but this can show the Russians from the weak side. And not just for the Western countries, for Ukraine and NATO countries, but also for the population of the Russia itself. So the situation is very complicated. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. Right before the Ukrainians carried out this massive missile attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, the Ukrainian sources published lots of videos of Ukrainian counter-offensive operation that took place during the previous days in the direction of the city of Uspenovka. As you can see, the map has been adjusted significantly. We have adjusted the map published based on the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and this is the video we're talking about. Here we can see the clashes in the central part of the settlement of Nova Grigorovka. Here we can see an armored vehicle of Ukraine, of the armored forces of Ukraine. This is the Ukrainian vehicle that was attacking positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation in the central part of the settlements. And here we can see positions of Russian forces and so on. And based on this video, lots of mappers adjusted their maps, showing at least the western parts of the settlement of Nova Grigorovka under complete control of the armored forces of Ukraine. But later, pro-Russian sources stated that this video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources was published long time ago, maybe it's 2 or 3 weeks ago, somewhere between, let's say, the late February or the beginning of March. And pro-Russian sources published additional videos showing that the Russians have already counterattacked in this area and restored control over the territories they lost. This is the first video that was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see the same video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, but from another angle. Here we can see how the Russians were counterattacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory, how the Russians were counterattacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Nova Grigorovka, and here we can see Russian soldiers that were moving through the village. And for example, this episode was geolocated right exactly at this point, but this episode doesn't change anything when talking about the areas on the map and so on. A few hours later, pro-Russian sources published another video, but this time from the central part of the settlement of Verbova. Here we can see a Russian soldier that was moving from one building to another, trying to find positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map at least like this, and now we understand that everything is very complicated in the Zaporozhye direction. We see that the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation. The Ukrainians continue sending troops with the purpose to establish control over the village and so on, but at the same time the Russians control and save their presence in this area. So that is why it's very complicated to understand how exactly the map should look like, and maybe the map that you can see right now in front of your screens is very close to the current situation, but maybe not for 100%, because it seems that there are lots of Russian positions and there are some places that are colored with the red color, but there are, let's say, pro-Ukrainian positions or positions of the armored forces of Ukraine. So the situation is very complicated in this area, but meanwhile the Russians continue offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Orekhov. But once again, everything tells us and shows us that the Russians during this stage of the conflict on the territory of Ukraine are trying to look business-like, they're trying to look constructive-like. So they're trying to make the situation and to support the situation when the Western countries will consider that it's time to lift some sanctions from the Russian Federation. And this is the best time for Russians to do this, and the Ukrainians are trying not to allow this thing to happen. So this is a very complicated political situation when the president of Russia must make a decision. But it seems that most likely the Russians will wait. The Russians most likely will wait because they need the sanctions to be lifted, and if it happens, the Russians will be able to get a short breath of fresh air, which can help them to regroup themselves and probably to prepare themselves before military campaign of the late 2026 or even of the early 2027. As for the other directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians are trying to keep advancing, but much slower in comparison with the late 2025, and we start receiving lots of updates from the Sumy direction. It seems that now the Russians understand that the buffer zone along the border with the Sumy region and with the Kharkiv region is much more important for Russians than to take under complete control the Donetsk region, because once again the Ukrainians attacked the city of Bryansk with Storm Shadow missiles using aircraft, but obviously everybody understand if the Russians had a buffer zone in this area like this, most likely this attack would have never happened. So that is why the Russians are concentrating their troops in this area according to different sources, and today several pro-Ukrainian authorities reported that the Russians are planning to create a 20 kilometers buffer zone along the border. So maybe this is exactly what we are going to see during the 2026. From one side, the Russians most likely will try to create this buffer zone, and maybe they will be able to do this at some point. But from the other side, Zelensky most likely will be able to save control over the Donetsk region for 2026, and he will be able to use this probably to force the Western countries and coalition of Willing and Ramstein group to support Ukraine additionally, because this is also going to be a result, at least for Ukrainian side. Now let's move to the Middle East, where the clashes between the coalition and the Iranians continue. According to information we have, according to the President of the United States of America and according to the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, the United States of America is going to attack Iran 20 times more powerful in comparison with any other attack that have been carried out since the beginning of the insane from this operation began. So most likely in coming hours more attacks will be recorded. The United States of America and the Israelis are attacking military infrastructure of Iran, and we see that's the most important thing, that all strikes and all attacks are moving further and further in the northeastern direction. For example, now we can say that since the beginning of this operation, the coalition were mainly attacking the western part and the southern part, and now we start receiving more and more updates further and deeper in the northeastern direction of Iran. And the most important task for the coalition is to establish complete fire control over the entire state of Iran without any chances for air defense or for something like this. Meanwhile, the Iranians continue controlling the Strait of Hormuz. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, several vessels and tankers were trying to cross this area, but the tankers and vessels were attacked. Currently very difficult to say by which party, but we have reports about the situation. The sources reported that another ship was attacked 36 nautical miles north of Abu Dhabi. So the situation is very difficult, and we see that the coalition still hasn't managed to unblock the Strait of Hormuz, but they will try to do this in coming days because the question is very important. The United States of America and most likely Donald Trump personally doesn't like an idea that the states are forced to lift sanctions from Russia because they cannot unblock the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the United States of America will try to do this physically, but even if we see a ship in the area of the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't mean that the Strait of Hormuz is being unblocked, because you need to control the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz to be 100% sure that the territory is under complete control. Meanwhile, the coalition continued bombing and attacking the infrastructure and military infrastructure of Iran along the Iranian side of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, but we understand that it is not enough. So that is why, meanwhile, the French aircrafts are moving further and further. We start receiving more reports about Charles de Gaulle progress in the Mediterranean Sea. We haven't received any report that the French aircraft carrier entered the Suez Canal, but obviously this air defense, this aircraft carrier group is approaching. Very difficult to say whether they're going to stay to the west of Israel or they will move with the purpose to reinforce the American forces in the Arabian Sea. Very difficult to say, but they're moving, which means that in coming days we'll see another round of escalation in this region as well. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.